Welcome to the Bend Don't Break podcast. I'm Aaron Schweitzer, your solo host today, while co-host is Laurel Bronze is on vacation. This podcast is powered by the Source Weekly, Bend's locally owned newspaper. We are the fastest growing podcast in Central Oregon. Thank you. And a special shout out today to Deschutes Brewery. They gave us the Squeezy Rider as some promotional beers for listeners. This is only available in the tasting room, and I did enjoy it over the holidays. And I can now verify that very good brew. So thanks again to Deschutes Brewery. We are switching things up today for the holidays, and editor Nicole Vulcan is joining us on the podcast. Nicole?
Hey.
And we're going to talk about our year in review. Nicole spent a lot of time this week pulling together our top 10 and look back at 2020. And so we did in our editorial section kind of a review of the content we found most pressing over the past 20 years to editorialize on, and then also the stories, top 10 stories that Nicole pulled together for the paper. So
just for 2020, not the last 20 years. We did do that another time, which was a lot of fun.
Right. For the anniversary, which we're in 23, so 2 years from now, we'll do it again for 25. But so Nicole, maybe just, I thought your editor's note for the intro to this issue was really good. Maybe talk a little bit about what you felt as you were pulling this together for 2020.
Well, I think, like all of us, we are ready to see this year go behind us. We want to just get past it and be done with it. But, there's something soothing about, spending a little bit of time looking back. I think we're all still just in the middle of this feeling of, we're just in it, right? We're in the middle of the pandemic. Some of the, while cases are starting to go down, it's still a difficult time. And, we're just dealing day to day. But looking back at that time, just made me realize how much we've done this year and how much, we've been able to shine a light on some of the good work our community has done and some of the work, the progress that our community has made. And so the top 10 stories really reflect that, just showing, what our readers were most interested in and, what that progress looked like.
I thought it was pretty interesting to me how, and I hope this isn't just my bad memory or me aging out, but how quickly some of this can fade away. I mean, going back through and looking back to March, and it's super interesting to read, pandemic is identified or coronavirus identified in Deschutes County when at the time we really didn't know what that meant or how deep we're going to go in. But the one that really struck me was the fires, because in the course of talking and thinking about the pandemic each week and what is the opening dates and all this other stuff, how quickly that has faded to the back. And over the Thanksgiving holidays, we traveled to the coast, and I was really struck by how much of an impact that fire had on those communities. As we've been quarantined, we haven't had a chance to see it with our own eyes. I think news has been pretty limited, but that's just one of the things that struck me initially.
For sure, that one, and maybe I'm revealing too much for those who have not read, but that was our number one story of the year. Most viewed story of the year was kind of a breaking news story about just, the headline was Oregon is burning and the fires are 0% contained. People wanted to read that. That was happening in real time. I remember talking to people in the newsroom. I happened to be working in the newsroom that day and just saying, hey, you guys, this is really, really bad. This is really bad. Oh my gosh, this is so bad. And just, listening to this press conference and just hearing, the severity of the situation, it was really scary and really intense. And, here in Central Oregon, I think it's been easy for us to forget because we still have our beautiful forests in close
Right.
proximity. We were fortunate enough not to lose any central Oregon cities. But like you said, I mean, it's right there for so many people. Last week, which is not part of our top 10, but last week we did a story talking about how some local restaurants who themselves are really, struggling, are still out there feeding people who are still housed in Redmond, living at one of the hotels there, the fire evacuees. So for them, it's really, this problem hasn't just faded away into headline obscurity. So that's, that was a reminder for me too, that wow, this was a huge story, and wow, it was only 3 months ago, and hey, I forgot about it for a
Right.
second.
Right. I thought the other one, and we'll just keep throwing spoilers out for people who haven't read the issue, but the things are getting weird section, because I also remember when that one came and just how strange. And at the time, I don't think, I mean, I think cognitively we're all aware, like, oh, people are under pressure, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of strain of being quarantined. I think it's a given now. We don't quite jump as much when we hear crazy stuff, or people who lose it in a grocery store um, because they've just been so pent up, and so with so much stress and whatever else is going on in their life. But I remember when that things are getting weird story hit, and we were talking about the woman who took the guy who took the Uber. John, maybe you can elaborate on what that story was.
Yeah, so this was a story that was from March 22nd, really early in the pandemic, as we all know. And just weird things were happening. So, and all these different things happened in one day, or I found out about them in one day. And I just thought, man, this is just, a combination of all these things. Let's write about it as kind of an aggregate thing of, here's what people are facing in the face of this acute problem. At the time, we were like, this is it's just happening now. We're all getting hit with all these changes and everything. And that was one way that people were affected. Now we have the chronic issues that are coming out, which is a whole other story. But okay, so the headline was, things are getting weird. An attack on a Bend Uber driver, a missing Arizona snowmobiler, and an explosion near Bend. Is this what isolation does to us? Because that's what I wondered. It's just like, man, it's only been not very long into this thing. Now we know, and this handful of seemingly unrelated incidents kind of showed that connecting thread of how everyone was reacting.
Well, it was crazy story. The Uber driver, or the Uber passenger, who seemed to be some person, 52-year-old professional,
Yeah.
intoxicated, just kind of lost his mind, attacked the driver. I mean, that may happen in cities, but it certainly doesn't happen in little old Bend, Oregon very much. And it did seem to indicate that people were getting tense.
Yeah, definitely. And you basically, you hit the high points. Someone in a well-off neighborhood taking a ride home after being out wherever they were, and seemingly looked like they were under a lot of stress.
Well, and we kind of talked about it when the teacher down in downtown Bend had that viral moment where from her car she started yelling at the protester, the anti-mask protesters that are one of those masks versus anti-mask things. And no one's, as this woman got blown up on social media and thrown across the country. I mean, a lot of conservative media outlets were picking her up. I did think by now we have become a little more callous. This happened a couple of weeks ago,
Mhm.
and how I think in our conversations you've kind of brought it back to me that these people are under a lot of pressure. Like, this is really someone who needs help. It's not somebody you want to throw up as like, oh, look, someone who's lost their mind, or from a political perspective, when really for me, it meant you need to extend some compassion to these people right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's true for everybody, which is an interesting point. It's just an interesting position to be in as a journalist and then as a newspaper, because we want to tell those stories that everyone's talking about. We start some of our editorial meetings with, hey, what's the thing that everyone's talking about right now? That's the thing that kind of guides what we're going to do in our weekly paper, which comes out sometimes days after these things happen. And so, but at the same time, you don't want to, that's a person who's been trying to teach kids online, who has probably likely has all the stresses and concerns that all the rest of us have, and now they see this thing that represents something that represents the other side of thinking from what they are thinking, and they lose it. And
Right.
it's like, okay, yeah, that was pretty extreme, but yeah, can you blame them? Can you really blame this person for
No, and I
having a
think,
moment?
yeah, right. And I think people just, for me, it was a wake up call, because you are seeing more of that. I think, unfortunately, as this thing continues, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of how good it's going to be in April, May, June, July, we're going to see more of it. And I think it is important to remember, like, this isn't really a spectacle as much as it's somebody's just reached the end of their rope with this issue. So
Right. And I mean, that's while over this last year we have become more of a news outlet that gets things out before the weekly paper cycle. Um, Having that time to put out a paper weekly does give us a chance to think about things a little more and say, okay, how, what is the next thing? Okay, we talked about this breaking news situation, not the woman on the street yelling at the protesters, but anything else that you could think of. Okay, there's a breaking news situation. Our paper comes out a few days later. We've had a little time to digest it and say, okay, what's next? And that's been good in this kind of situation where you know um, it kind of takes the temperature down a little bit on some of that stuff, and it's not just a spectacle. We really want to talk about what does it mean for people to experience something like that. What does it mean for our community to have people who are feeling the way that woman felt, the way those protesters felt? you know those are all community members who have voices and feelings and opinions. And of course, in this time, this now very close to post-Trump era, that's a big conversation. Is like, how do we recognize each other's humanity? How do we keep each other, in mind, and not just say, okay, no, I'm not going to, entertain that person's point of view.
let's talk about another one that I thought was really interesting. I was surprised at the date for it. But the article "Bend is Awesome, Don't Come Here," which was our number 7 on March 28th. Tourism is one of those things that this community struggles with on a monthly basis, it seems. And, it's one of those things it's a boom for the economy. People wonder about its effect on the culture. I think we've had a really good opportunity during this quarantine to see what the value of tourism is, what kind of community we want to be towards tourists. But maybe talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so you're right. Like March 28th, the Bend city manager released an order that basically discouraged tourist travel. And so looking back at that, and on March 28th, I think a vast majority of Bendites, perhaps minus tourism industry people, thought, oh yeah, that's the right thing to do. But in there, and right in the first paragraph, we talk about, well, it really didn't have any teeth, right? There was no violation, or no fines for violations, no arrests, nothing like that really would happen besides just, hey, please don't come. And subsequently, the community has really come out with a lot of opinions about whether that was whether they should have done that at all. On the other side of the spectrum, maybe whether they should have, put fines into it, had some enforcement. This was a time when in were juxtaposed against a time when in Italy you had mayors going onto YouTube and badgering and berating their people who lived there to stay home, calling people out. It was really, really a different thing than what we were doing. So just an interesting juxtaposition of that compared to what we ended up doing. And as we've heard from a lot of readers, people had a lot of opinions about that. I think we had a fairly robust tourist summer. So you kind of have to wonder what would have looked different if it would have, there would have been a more definitive thing going on there. Either no request or a very definitive order with fines involved.
Yeah, the numbers I've seen, and my apologies to the Tourism Bureau if I'm getting this wrong, but during the course of the summer, they, I think in the city we were down 10%. I think in the county it was pretty close to a normal year. And then into the fall, it continued. The thing that struck me was that for being that significant of a number of people here, it was still pretty quiet. I mean, our offices sit on Bond Street. Obviously, I take a very non-scientific approach to how the community is doing because we can watch how traffic is going. And in any year, Bond Street's one of the busiest streets in the city. And even throughout the course of the summer, it was pretty slow, but those people were here, and it does make you realize how much of an impact Airbnb has had on the community, where those people are coming, they're staying in homes, and it really is something where I think people were behaving, whether you wanted them here or not. I didn't see a lot of incidences of tourists being the ones that were being shouted out. It was usually some businesses that were going sideways with not adhering to regulations or social gatherings. So it's been interesting to me to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of wonder. I know they talk, the main marker about tourism that we look at is rooms occupied, the number of rooms occupied, and that includes Airbnbs, any short-term rental. Sure, those were 85% occupancy, but did those people go on a tour? Did they go, right. Did they go hang out at the brewery like they would have? Did they, I don't know what else you can buy. Those are the two things that I'm thinking of the most.
Cycle pub. We didn't see that.
When we did see a cycle pub pass by the office, it was a pretty significant event. Right. Normally we're like, oh, here they come again. Here they come again. Right, there's two of them.
Right. Yeah. I also think the thing about tourism that I'm personally fascinated by, and I think will be something for 2021, is tourists are always the other. They're always somebody, they're always branded as something else. We want to go to communities, we want to go do our vacation, and when we go there, we're like, oh, look, we're living like locals, or we're really fitting in. And but people who come here, they're not the same. They're different. And before, I think legislatively, we've taken an approach that they are somewhat different to us. And I just think now, especially when you see these businesses that are hurting, they rely on these tourists. I wonder if there isn't going to be a little bit more compassion or even celebration that these folks are like our community, that they're coming here, that they are spending their dollars, that they are able to do the cycle pub, God forbid. And yeah, so that maybe there'll be a change in tone regarding how we react to those folks. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would speculate for some people, but for others, this has only exacerbated their ire against because we're in this position where it's like, someone comes near me in the grocery store and I don't even think about it, but I instantly balk, Yeah. And so that extrapolates out and out into our community. There was an unfortunate incident that I heard about this week. of a Jewish man having come out to his car, California plates here in Bend, and swastikas on the car. And they couldn't have known that this person was Jewish, but it was a really triggering event for him. And we're going to report upon this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I wonder is what is going to be the trend from this? I mean, some of that I think is political. I mean, in the whole state, the area of the state that's hurting the most is the coast. And we went for Thanksgiving over to the coast, stayed in an Airbnb with close family, and we took takeout from one of the restaurants over there. And the woman was literally crying when we came to get the food because their holiday season, due to the freeze, had been completely eliminated. And it just doesn't feel to me like Oregon ought to be about Central Oregon, and that, we should be thinking about the larger impacts. I mean, we don't even have to keep it at Oregon, but at least it's a start to think about the people on the coast who are like really hurting. Like,
Yeah.
the tourism impacted communities in the state are the ones getting hit hardest. And we did okay, through this thing, but the coast didn't. And I think it's something for people to keep in mind when they're thinking about whether they want to like welcome people here or not.
Yeah.
And if they're getting swastikas stuck on their car, I mean, what does that mean? Like it's just an ugly, ugly face.
Yeah. Pretty terrible. Yeah. Just not the kind of thing you want to have a visitor go back and tell their friends about Central Oregon.
Another story that I think is certainly going to continue into 2021, but we saw it in every podcast. I think I've made fun of the term Zoom Town.
Yeah.
And here we are again talking about Zoom Town. But that bubble that won't burst, which we reported on in the fall, it's been a crazy thing to watch as in the middle of an economic problem like this. We've seen these kind of home prices jumping and this lack of inventory. Maybe talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, since we have our real estate column every week, we've been keeping up on that little by little all the time. But, the story is home prices have gone up, and the real estate agent that we talked to said he's never seen anything like this. People are panic buying. They're trying to buy sight unseen. They're just coming out of the woodwork. It's that phenomenon of, people really are feeling trapped in cities, and a place like Bend that is continually on top 10s and top 20s for one of the most desirable places, the most desirable multi-sport town was the one from Outside Magazine most recently. Outside Magazine this week, named Meisner Nordic one of the best cross-country ski areas in the town. So they, we're on people's radar. So when they think, I need to get out of the city, of course they're going to say, oh yeah, that place Bend that I went that was sunny and awesome and all those things to do, that sounds good. Oh, the real estate prices are half what I pay in the city. Boom. Meanwhile, people, who live here and work here and earn wages that reflect the local economy, it really causes them to suffer. So it's interesting in Bend. It's been a phenomenon in Bend, but also looking at some of the other cities that are in the surrounding area. Redmond, for example, in locals' minds was still an affordable place to live. Now you're seeing prices in Redmond that rivaled what Bend had just a couple of years ago. And so, the secret's out.
Yeah, Redmond is a constant source of conversation on this podcast, as listeners will know. And I'm just a huge fan of how they're growing and what they're doing there. But it's true. I mean, it's that fine balance. You see a lot of the cultural and quality of life things coming up in Redmond. I mean, for people like myself who've lived here for quite a while, Redmond was just a drive-through. You went to Smith Rock, you had a great time, you came back to Bend, and and it just wasn't some place you went. And now they've got plenty of great restaurants and good breweries and things that you want to go visit, even if you're living here. And with it has come, I don't know what I think their housing prices have had a comparable increase. I know we were 15% increase here in Bend. I think they were very similar.
Yeah, definitely. Having just bought a house myself and wondering if at that time during the beginning of the pandemic, wondering whether I would be able to make it into the market. I was looking at Redmond and, and keeping pretty close eye on the prices there. And it's really it was, for someone buying on the lower end of the spectrum, it was interesting because you would see some houses that would be comparable price to Bend. And then you'd see some that were way cheaper. So I think it might be a case of, some people are getting clued into the fact that they can fetch that higher price. Some people still haven't quite gotten there, and are still thinking of trying to make it reasonable for people. I suspect.
I believe we haven't done a lot of coverage on the housing market in Sisters, and we don't talk about it a lot on this podcast, but they're in the same boat. I think it's pushed out to Prineville. I've heard of people now looking at Lapine as a place where they're going to do a lot of commuting back and forth. And this brings us to transportation, which if anybody knows that drive now from Redmond to Bend, good on you if you're not making that drive. But 4:30, it's starting to get very city-like on that drive, and there isn't really any option if you want to get up there.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned transportation because this list was populated basically by looking at our web numbers and seeing what stories got the most traffic. And I think in a normal year, you would have seen a couple of the features that we did about transportation issues on this list. I mean, that is locally such an important issue, but it didn't even make the top 10 this year. We did mention it in our editorial, that our boot and slipper editorial that we gave this week. For being such a hot button issue, didn't rate against real estate and coronavirus and protests and all the others.
Let's talk about some of the editorial top 10s. Nicole, maybe jump off with our number one.
So you want to talk about just the whole list? For the boot and slipper one, or for the news?
Boot and slipper.
Okay. Well, so we didn't assign them exactly like a number one. We sort of just toggled back and forth between wins and losses, boots and slippers. So anyone who's read the source for any long length of time might remember the boot and slipper, which was what do I want to call it? A literary device used.
I got to give a shout out to Bruce Miller at this point, who initiated the boot slipper way back when. And it was pretty fun to do boot slipper. I got to say, it was fun to come back. It gives you a lot of, when you're writing these editorials, that format, if anybody's knows editorial writing, it can be fairly restrictive. It's pretty stifling in some senses, but you add up a boot and slipper in there, it makes it a little more fun. I think it's a funner read too. I enjoyed doing it again.
Yeah. We're bringing it back on occasion when we feel like it.
Right.
But basically, it's if politicians, topics that politicians acting badly, they get the boot. Favorable ones get the slipper. So each week, back in the day, they used to give one or the other. So this year, I think we've done one where we mentioned of someone getting the boot, but now we brought it back for this year because there's so many things to talk about. So what we kicked it off with is a slipper for massive voter turnout. This is no secret and no surprise that nationwide turnout was up. It was quite a heated election. In Oregon, that was the case as well. Only up by 11%. Of course, we have to, we should have probably thrown in a kudos to Motor Voter and to all the other mail-in voting initiatives that have been in our state. Motor Voter is newer, but mail-in voting has been around for decades. And we got a shout out from Stacey Abrams over in Georgia for when she was asked if she could design a good voting system for her state, what it would look like. And she, in one word, just said Oregon.
That's great.
So, that just shows you how well we have it here. We have currently we have a Republican Secretary of State, and I feel like that probably lended some not credibility, but maybe gave those in the state who might have otherwise worried about voter fraud in our state, and we do have those folks still out there, but at least having some balance in our statewide offices, in my mind, might have balanced that out for some people.
Yeah, I mean, it was having lived here for so long. It was very interesting this year to kind of be woken up to the fact that there are these states across the country. If you don't have family living there and you don't visit them very often, all of a sudden they pop in the news for this antiquated standing in line at a school. When I grew up in Atlanta, we had to do that. The first time I voted, I stood in the line for over an hour to get up to go behind the curtain and do that, what I consider very old-fashioned thing. And it was shocking to see those images rolling out in national news of some of these places where who would nowadays, I think, oh my gosh, I would never stand in that line. Like, I love democracy, but if I'm in the Atlanta heat for 2 hours or something now, because it's gotten so much worse for a lot of these places, pretty incredible.
Yeah, and then throw in the fact that people are leaving their homes, maybe some of them for one of the only times to go out in public that they have done since the pandemic. That's pretty huge to see people in spite of the odds coming out.
Yeah. How about the another slipper for the year we stopped saying Bend is so white?
Yeah. So, okay, I'll just share a little anecdote here. One of the first weeks that I came to Bend to start this job, someone in our editorial meeting, our story meetings, suggested, hey, why don't we look at why is Bend so white? And I just thought, okay, that's on its premise maybe an interesting topic, but how about also we realize that, because I had looked at census numbers as part of the job, I wanted to understand what the community looked like. I knew that there was, there were Black and brown people here. And so I felt like just saying that, repeating that phrase was just really perpetuating a stereotype that really wasn't going to benefit anyone, but perhaps the people who wanted to keep it that way. And so I just sort of, let that story idea go and simmer. And subsequently, we've done a lot of other stuff. However, this year has been, as we know, a pretty monumentous year for racial justice, at least bringing it to the forefront for a lot of people who perhaps haven't really, considered its impact on society and even how they might be participating in some of the activities and events that don't benefit the broader society. So, we just wanted to call out in this slipper some of the groups that have formed this year, including the Central Oregon Black Leaders Assembly, the Love Your Neighbor Project, the Fathers Group, which I apologize, they might have started before 2020, but they're a group of men of color who are advocating for their children and for their role as fathers in the community. And then we have student-focused town halls on racism, which started before 2020 as well, but continued in this year. We also have the fact that Bend established a Human Rights and Equity Commission, which is now forming its members. So we really made a lot of progress, and there's still a lot of work to do, but I hope, and this one was kind of a stretch, but I hope that in the future, when people say Bend is so white, they will be shot down by others who will say, but wait, look, you need to realize that there are people of color here, and here's what they're doing, and here's how you can support their work.
Yeah, and I like the way you concluded it with now there's these organizations where you can take your frustrations and you can put them into action. And if anything's changed, that's certainly what has changed, is that you do have outlets now, whereas before, without the formation of these groups, there really wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that no one group and no one person has invented this conversation around racial equity and justice and visibility in our community, but I think we have made a lot of progress over the last several years.
Let's talk about the boot for the Melee pilot butte and the charges that didn't stick. And that was, it got press at the time, but I'm not sure how much that really penetrated the community or people understood how significant that was. Maybe you could elaborate.
Yeah, so I mean, we, as journalists, we're signed up for like every press release option that we can possibly get. So we get press releases all the time. There's a lot of things that we see that we don't ever report on, but they come across our desks. What doesn't come across our desks almost ever, I don't believe I can think of another time, is police, after an incident, issuing a press release to say, here are the charges that we believe all of these people, based on our investigation, should face after this incident. Typically what happens is they'll make an arrest, and then they will say, yes, this person was, this person is accused of these crimes. And then and the district attorney's office then will decide which charges they're actually going to be charged with. And, then typically we'll hear, okay, this person is formally charged with this thing. Well, in this case, after this incident at Pilot Butte against, where it was Black Lives Matter activists, essentially against Trump supporters, in what started out as a fairly peaceful event, turned into someone pulling a gun. And some pepper spray and some other things happened. Following that, at the time, the police did not arrest the gentleman who pulled the gun, who was accused of pulling the gun. And soon after, the police issued this press release that said, here's 22 people that we think should be given charge or should be charged. That's just really irregular. It's just really, really not the way that it's done. In fact, that, District Attorney John Hummel said during his 6 years in office, he'd never seen the police department inform the public as to what charges they think he should file. So it was irregular for him too. So that was kind of the boot element of that being included in this week's editorial. Just, it felt like the police were trying to force the DA's hand, and he wasn't having it.
Yeah, it was super unusual, super interesting, and it's I think again reflective of the times and how this really isn't something our community's seen before. We haven't seen this level of friction. We haven't seen these kind of protests. We certainly haven't seen people pulling guns on protesters. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have had protests on the corner downtown for many years, and they've always been very peaceful. People getting, exercising their democratic rights. But this is new. This is definitely mm-hmm. a new, and I think that a reflection of the kind of stress and that not only the virus has put on, but national politics as well. I mean, people are teed up.
Yeah. On the flip side, I think it's, this year has empowered some folks in the community to speak out, more Black and brown people forming coalitions and groups and feeling empowered to share their perspectives. And so that's, I guess, the flip side of it is that, yeah, you're empowering some people who might, incite violence but on the other side, you're empowering people who have not felt safe enough to speak about their experiences until now.
Let's shift over to this one. We wrote kind of double editorials on because it came on the heels pretty quickly, but the Deschutes mm-hmm. County's double jeopardy pot opt-out
Right.
maybe talk about what that issue was.
Okay, so when voters in Oregon legalized marijuana back in 2015, each county had the ability to decide on its own whether or not they would allow marijuana growing and selling in their counties. Um, we've had a storied history in Deschutes County, but essentially there was there we opted in, and so that's why you see Bend and each city also was able to opt in. So that's why you see Deschutes County itself, you can see grows, but Redmond you don't see dispensaries. Bend you do. Bend said yes, Redmond said no, Deschutes County said yes, we want farms. And then the current Deschutes County commissioners decided that they were hearing a lot of negative feedback from rural folks about farms near their homes. So they decided this year to put something on the ballot to essentially stop. They had already through some of their actions basically made it so there was no new farms being allowed, and then they put it to the voters in a really weird way that even confused us, to be honest. The language of the measure asking whether Deschutes County should continue to allow or should continue to ban new grows. It just was confusing.
Yeah, it was a yes means no, no means yes
Right. And
measure.
so, we had people asking us because we were confused as well. And in the end, voters, it came out that now there are no new grows allowed in Deschutes County. But as a consequence, we also do not qualify for any of the state marijuana tax money.
Yeah, there was
That doesn't even include, you have the dispensaries collecting tax. They're collecting some tax on behalf of the city, and I believe that city money will still flow to the city. But the state funds, the state tax collected even in Deschutes County will not benefit Deschutes County. And that's,
Yeah, as I understand it, originally when the measure passed at the state level, there was a poison pill in there intended to help counties navigate around what could be and what could not be done with regard to this legislation. And our county decided to step over that line and begin to regulate things that statewide voters wanted enacted. And so we're being punished essentially.
yeah, I mean, and as we pointed out, in our editorial that we did last week, somehow in the midst of all of this stuff that's happened in this administration, we did see hemp become federally legal. So you have outdoor hemp farms that are completely legal under any state or federal law out there in the rural county, who are going to continue growing. But meanwhile, the ones that are indoor and have to be heavily regulated to grow the stuff that's psychotropic are not allowed. So, we kind of pointed out that we're not sure that everyone understands that distinction, because I look at those two plants, the one that's CBD based and the one that's THC based. I can't tell the difference.
No. I remember if you bring anybody into that drive between Bend and Sisters who's visiting, and you point over to those fields, they freak out. It's a fun little tourist thing to do with your family members, is take them to see the hemp grow and blow their mind. But yeah, and the thing I think was good that we pointed out is that we elect county commissioners to be informed about these decisions. I think I know nobody within our office was aware that passing that measure was going to cut the funding off, but the information was there. And I think if that had been in the voters pamphlet, or even something that was discussed prior to it getting on the voters pamphlet, it would have been a non-starter. No county, and maybe this is something that needs to be further researched, is how did they know? you know, did the county commissioners know prior to putting that on the ballot that we'd lose all that funding, and did they go ahead with it anyways? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, it's certainly a question that I wish I would have asked. You know, coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yeah, it's not been on the radar of, you know, I don't think anybody would have anticipated, but now it's certainly something that will motivate another ballot measure. We're going to see it again. We're going to have to see it again. It's way too much money.
Mm-hmm.
Did we figure out how much money that was in general that we're
Based
losing?
on last year's, it'll be in the hundreds of thousands
Yeah,
of lost tax revenue.
it's incredible. It's incredible. What other ones do we have on our list here? How about failure to achieve in-person instruction for all students?
Oh man, this is, you know, you talk about the evolution of the people's thoughts and feelings about the pandemic. And this is one that we're really starting to see a pretty significant shift. And this is, and I'm not surprised, but locally and statewide, just to realizing the effects that this is having on our kids. And so as we pointed out, you know, I have to find it ironic that I can go still shop for curtains and shoes and makeup at Target, but I can't send my child to school. And, you know, there is quite a significant movement around this. And we as an editorial board took the position that this was a failure of creativity and leadership on the part of state and local leaders to not be able to figure this out. We had several months of relative calm, September, October. I mean, some folks even believed that maybe we should have had kids going to school throughout the summer when we were able to do, we're able, creative perspective to, you know, to send kids to school outdoors. And so there's just a lot of, you know, a lot of activity around this right now. We're seeing some shifts. The governor has now, as of January 1st, made it possible for districts to decide on their own whether or not they think that they're ready for to send kids back to school in person safely. But you know, it's a lot of lost time. And as someone who has very young kids in my life, not my own, I have seen the effects this has had. And yes, I understand that. I empathize with the teachers and the administrators and the folks who have been trying to figure this out and do their best. But I think you know, we I believe are justified in giving a boot for their failure to be creative in this realm.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed lately is, I mean, you certainly can feel the pressure. I think it's as we've editorialized all along during this thing, there just simply has not been enough really public discussion regarding the impacts that are on the other side of the spectrum from the pandemic. That, you know, it's starting to roll out now, but it's all stuff that people knew pretty clearly. You're seeing incredible rise in suicide rate, opium addiction, homelessness, mental health crises. And this isn't just kind of these superficial bumps like, oh, well, we're seeing some. It's a pretty steep incline. And and it's those kind of like give and takes and that we don't hear. We hear a lot about safety and certainly, you know, we're in a serious time, but having a more robust discussion. I saw that when a lot of local elected officials signed the letter and sent it to Governor Brown to make the changes, to push her to make the moves. And I think now it's going to be incumbent on those same officials to continue to push for what this looks like as we roll out.
Yeah, one of the most troubling things about it, that when I started thinking about it, and I started thinking about it because some folks were asking, some community members were asking me questions based on me, you know, being in the news, about them hearing that some kids had gone back to school and some hadn't. Well, you know, what has happened is even in our own district and some other districts, some schools, individual schools, have been able to send some kids back on a very limited basis. But even on a limited basis, that means that some students in our district are able to access things that they need. They're able to access resources. They're able to interact and do the things that they need to do to learn most effectively, while others have not. And that's troubling, that we have so much inequity even within one district, that there probably should have been a lot more conversation around that.
Yeah, and about what it, and I think that's where the creativity part comes in, is that we certainly have been able to figure out ways to, like you said, continue shopping. What are some of the parameters? What are some of the buildings that could have been used or can be used? And if we can't send everybody back, is there a way to get, some of these at-risk students who do need, mental health services or food? How can we keep them connected so that they don't drop off, which is what I think you're going to see when the
Yeah, I mean,
numbers
and
come.
you're talking about opioid increases, you're talking about overdoses and mental health. Those are things that are being reported right now, because those people are then put into a place where those things are able to be reported. They go to a hospital, they go to a clinic, they see a mental health professional.
Good point.
What I think about is the children, the youth whose troubles are not being reported, who there's a reason that teachers and educators and people in schools are mandatory reporters. It's because they find things in schools that are happening to kids. And I really have a hard time believing they're going to just, uncover the same issues that they might uncover in a school, that they would, that they wouldn't uncover the same thing on Zoom that they might in person.
Absolutely. So we're getting to the end of our podcast here. Any last thoughts on coverage or what 2021 is going to look like from your perspective?
Well, I'm just really, like I said in my editor's note, really proud of the work that our team has done. We, like every other business and every other institution in this world, I suppose, we've struggled, and we've had to overcome challenges this year. And just to see the work that we've done compiled in that way shows me that we're not spinning against the wind. We have been able to serve our community. We have been able to bring some kind of knowledge and understanding and enlightenment throughout this whole time. And so that's a good feeling. In 2021, I will not lie and say that I'm not looking forward to doing a summer music issue. I'm looking forward to doing, some of the fun stuff that really got laid by the wayside this year. Just looking at our web numbers, people wanted news this year. They just really did. That's what they wanted. They ate up the breaking news. They subscribed to our Cascades reader. They read it faithfully just so they could be getting that stuff. But it'll be fun to talk about how that, how it's going to feel for that musician to hit the stage for the first time, or for a restaurateur to see a full dining room full of happy people. And I hope that we can do that this year. I hope we can do that, and at the same time keep tackling the issues that we have. Our housing crisis is not going to go away. As we've seen, it's only going to get worse. Our homelessness issues are going to probably be, continue to be a major issue as housing prices continue to suffer, as people continue to be suffering from the impacts of the unemployment crisis. And of course, the mental health stuff is huge. And so first thing in 2021, we will be tackling some topics around mental health.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'm struck by, I think for 2021 is because there has been this enormous number of people moving here. and you really have not seen them. Again,
Mhm.
we sit here on Bond Street, and it's pretty quiet. And I always ask the question, there's thousands of people that since March to today have moved here. They've gone into their homes, they've been quarantined. Um, they don't get out much. Nobody gets out much. And I think there's going to be a pretty radical adjustment for Bend, Oregon, in
Mhm.
particular, when the quarantine is lifted. What it looks like when all these people come out. A lot of facilities, a lot of restaurants and stuff are going to be overwhelmed. There's going to be massive lines. There's going to be you're going to feel what it truly is like to live in a Zoom town. Right now, we're enjoying all the benefits to
Mhm.
uh, high retail sales, and realtors are doing well, and all the people associated with that industry. But those people are here for good, and they
Yeah.
brought with them their politics, their preferences for culture. Um, and that's all been forestalled. It hasn't rolled out slowly. So you're going to see a little impact, I think, from that in
Yeah,
2020.
that's definitely, as a journalist, something that's really interesting to me. And I've been thinking about those people a lot. And we rolled out a new little feature in the paper called "If You're New Here." Of course, longtime locals might grumble, but this is our this is our this is our stab at helping educate, show people what the vibe is like, give them some information that they really want to know. So, we're tackling pretty light topics like, ice skating and snow parks right now. But there might come an opportunity to, let's do one about crosswalks. What is it like? How do we deal with pedestrians as drivers in Oregon? Things like that, that the longtime locals complain about the newbies, right? They,
Right.
they don't stop for
Yeah.
pedestrians, stuff like that. So it's our goal to kind of, educate, and also bring them along to what it's like to be an Oregonian. And that's going to be a fun thing. I also just look forward to, to the energy and new ideas that some of those folks are going to bring and are
Yeah.
bringing already, and they're just back in the shadows. So, our paper is a place, if you're from an urban community, almost anywhere in the world, anywhere in the U.S. and sometimes in the world too. You know what papers like ours do. Our calendar is always a big piece of what we do, and so they pick those papers up in their cities. They know that that type of paper is going to bring them that same vibe here as well. So I think we're well positioned to welcome them in, to show them the way. Some might say they should go back to where they came from, but they're here. Let's, like everything that exists in the world, you can either reject it or accept it and say, how do we make the most of this? How do we elevate instead of, aggravate?
Well, that's going to conclude our podcast. This would be a good place for us to just, as we part, send a shout out to people. If you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the paper and the coverage we do, you can become a Source Insider. You get great perks for being an insider, and your donation helps us continue to do all the important and fun things that we do here. And we desperately need you during these times, and are wishing everyone a better 2021 as we head out. So
That's right.
thanks.
Thanks
Thank you,
for
everyone.
thanks to all you readers out there.